I just got back from Michigan State, and I gave the exact same talk to the art department in Lansing, East Lansing. So it was a good little warm-up for this, this being the context of some of this work, I'm going to show you a lot of images today. I found that over the years, people really enjoy the process, and oftentimes, because I'm so slightly schizophrenic in my art practice, that I like to bounce around a lot. And that means scale, indoors, outdoors, materials, but the kind of themes remain the same, which is, like Susan mentioned, this kind of tension that exists between man and nature. And I grew up in Northern California, and so discovering the Hudson Valley was a real connection for my wife and I. After spending kind of a decade in Brooklyn and then moving upstate, it felt like we were returning home, excluding the winter. Okay, so I think we're just going to look at negative space for these next few seconds. Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you about 10 years worth of art, 10 years worth of projects, and I'm going to start with a project in Chicago that I was invited to participate in a show that was looking at Alexander Calder. Chicago has a rich history with Alexander Calder, and curator Lynn Warren at the MCA decided to set up this project where she was looking at about 7, 8 contemporary artists in conjunction with Calder and some of Alexander Calder's influence on younger contemporary artists. And the MCA invited me to make a piece in a space very similar to MASS MoCA. And the space was an atrium. And so I went to Chicago on a few visits. I did a pretty extensive, site visit there, and the space was exactly 50 feet high by 25 feet wide. So I really wanted to address some type of hanging piece, and I had this idea that I would collect material from the streets of Chicago. And I tend to, when I approach these projects, I tend to like to set up rules. And the rule for this particular project was kind of neighborhood by neighborhood. I wanted to scour the alleyways, the streets, dumpsters, and my goal was to kind of look for discarded wood, things that once had a function for either an industrial site or the home. As you can see here, there was chairs, baby cribs, mantles, baseboards, old floors, window frames, and I just collected for week after week, kind of amassing all these things that have been disregarded. Many of them still, in my eyes, had a function or had some life left in them. You can see here a pile of chair legs, couch legs. Here's like a electric company's spool. I think it was a telephone company. There's part of a crib. Behind that is an old ironing board. In the foreground, you've got more buckets of kind of handles and legs. This was an old mantle. Stuff that I discovered just kind of in the alleyways of Chicago. As everyone is probably familiar with, Chicago suffered a tragic fire. And when they rebuilt Chicago, unlike New York, every street has an alleyway. So most of the garbage is put in the back of the houses. And the other thing I discovered is Chicago's a very clean city. Here's some lattice. And then I went back to my studio in upstate New York, and I made this little model. And this was the exact dimensions of the atrium when you enter into the museum. So down on the left would be this large 2,000-pound maple log. And you would enter, and the log itself would be about 11 feet from the ground above you. And then if you turn left into that double door, you would see Calder's work. And if you turn right, you would see the work of the the younger artists that were influenced by color. And so then, upon heading upstairs, you would be confronted by this mass of the material that I had collected that had the equal weight of the log. You know, I ordered doll furniture, I made furniture, and I really took an inventory of everything that I had kind of amassed and went back, and you can see the spool up there. This was actually fun, working like a little architect to make this thing. And so this would be the kind of relationship you would have on the second floor to this cluster. And then here's another view. And then I went back to Chicago, and the MCA established a relationship with a nonprofit in the south side of Chicago called Little Black Pearl. And it was a nice exchange because I was able to make the piece at Little Black Pearl. It was kind of a youth center, after-school art youth center. And that was a really nice experience to have the kids come in every day and watch this thing evolve. The cluster had a main core to it. That's this steel leg coming off here. Was the support system, and this dresser was actually owned by a preparator that worked at the MCA, and I think he was thrilled to get it out of his apartment. And but we had to reconstruct the strength of the dresser because it didn't have much integrity left to it. So this is this kind of the largest piece is starting, and then here it is being installed. And when I made the model in my studio, I knew I would always have this issue of trying to determine the equal weights of these two parts. I roughly knew how much the log weighed, and I was able to somewhat weigh the cluster. Controlling the weight of the cluster was easy because I could take or add, but controlling the weight of the log would be a little more challenging. And the log itself was actually cut in half, and inside the log, here's it seems pretty dark here. The log was cut in half, and then inside we had a superstructure, and then we put the log back together. So in the end, we left a hole at the top on the other side of this bracket, and I was even able to add sand. In the end, I added 200 pounds of sand, which equaled the weight of the two objects, the two items, left and right. And so here it was completed, and down on the bottom here, you can see this line here is where we cut the log in half. And then we put it back together, and I saved all the bark along the seam and all the way up here, and then we glued the bark back on. The maple log was found in a mill in western Michigan, about 75 miles east of Chicago. So I was really interested in this relationship that I was trying to set up between how the log came to be and what was the result of that. And I wanted the viewers to have this experience that they could come in and see these two opposing forces, the kind of beginning and the end. And then the title is a mouthful, so I always put this in here. From the forest to the mill, to the store, to the home, to the streets and back again. And I really was trying to really pound this idea home of this circular experience that we deal with. And I think it came back to my grandmother was one of 14 kids, 7 boys, 7 girls, and she was born in Arkansas. And during the time of her life, they recycled everything, they fixed everything, and going to the store and actually buying something other than a battery was not an option. And I really like this idea of finding these things and giving them a second life. And so you'll see that project again here at MASS MoCA, or part of that project. Then I was invited to Texas to a place called Art House, and they were going through a big architectural renovation like most museums have done in the last 10 years or so, or continue to do. And so they were in a building on Congress and right downtown that this building had gone through many different creations or inventions. It was a shopping mall, a movie theater, a department store, and it eventually became a contemporary art center. And so they were in the middle of this renovation, and I wanted to use the debris from the renovation to make kind of this experience that addressed the notion of food. I started to go down to Austin, and I saw that you know, Austin is kind of this food hub. Whole Foods started there, and there's a big university community, and there's all these food trucks. And so I wanted to kind of do this complete installation that not only dealt with the history of our house, but kind of the history of food in that region. And I think I've got, here is the end result of their remodel. And what you're seeing there is 168 cutouts that were measured 3 inches by 19 inches. And the light shines through these cutouts. And they're actually cut into the building. And you can kind of see them. It was a design component by the architects. And so I requested, I kind of did a big call for recipes. I wanted people to send in recipes that could be passed down through generations in their family. Stuff like that my grandmother had passed down to my mother, like corn pudding, or in my wife's case, her father-in-law, my father-in-law, cabbage salad. Stuff that had gone through, you know, been passed down. And then on the walls, each one of these spaces that matched the spaces cut out in the windows were recipes. And the staff helped me handwrite the recipes. So when people came into the museum, there were these series of dinner tables, almost like, kind of like Judy Chicago's dinner party in a way. And also, I used recycled wine bottles from restaurants in Austin, and I made a series of these vessels. Some of them were for serving wine or water, and some of them were lamps. Here's an Absolute vodka platter. Here's Martinelli's apple juice as dinner plates. I worked with 2 different glass blowers in Austin, and I really love this idea of collaboration where I would meet with the glass blower and I'd say, okay, what's possible? What isn't possible? And I found out that 2 different glasses cannot be fused, 2 different types of glass. But if you take one glass, like the Absolute, you can fuse those and melt those and kind of create form. And so the idea was there would be this kind of dinner party atmosphere. We had the recipes on the wall. All this material you're seeing, and this was the old sign in front of Art House that indicated the Texas Art Association. And so this glass was on the facade of the building. And these lamps kind of hung. And they were upside down wine bottles that I had melted, and then we cut off the bottom. And this was a railing for the department store. There was always an art house upstairs, and we just removed it and used it, made little triangles to make the table legs for the glass. And there is the completed art house. And so then what happened was, I wanted all this to kind of have a final event, which was basically like a big dinner party. There's more detailed shots. I also did a drawing of a 2x10 that I removed from the museum, or from the building. And that gives you a sense of the scale of it. And so here is the kind of show in its stagnant resting space. And so I organized a series of food events, kind of an educational component. This was a gingerbread house demonstration. And then this guy worked at a local Japanese restaurant in Austin, and he eventually became top chef. So that was kind of cool. And he did a whole raw food demonstration. And then there was a slow food demonstration. And the idea was that people could follow from the recipes, make the recipes, and have this kind of relationship to the food and the history of their families. In the back, there was a band playing, and the name of the project was called More Art About Buildings and Food. which was inspired by the 1977 record of the Talking Heads. More songs about buildings and food. And so, because I'm such a control freak, I made the band only play songs from that record. And they loved it. Their version of Psycho Killer was definitely the highlight of the day. And then there was the gingerbread thing. And then this leads to an older piece that is called the Driftwood from Around the World Mobile. And this was an interesting story. We were in Hawaii, and I started collecting driftwood. And I was really, really inspired by the kind of source of this wood, knowing that it could be from anywhere in the world and any age. And so I went to the hotel at the end of our trip, and I said, you know, I want to arrange to send this driftwood back to my studio. And the concierge said, we'd be glad to do that, but we'd really like you to say a prayer because you're taking wood from the Hawaiian Islands. And I always thought that was really poetic. And so she made me repeat this prayer back to her that kind of blessed the wood. And so the idea here was that I really wanted to capture the kind of poignancy that wood might have experienced floating in the ocean for a number of years, months, or days. And at this point, I really did use Calder's kind of diagram for one of his signature mobiles. I'm going to go through some quick other pieces. This is cast concrete bottles. I went to my local dump and just collected as many different types of plastic bottles that are out there. Poland Spring, CocaCola, Gatorade, antifreeze, you name it. And then filled these with colored concrete. And this was an interesting project because you take for granted how much signature is put into these things and how much thought. And it was a real environmental piece. I kept thinking about this idea of a plastic water bottle and how detrimental that it could be if we continue to mass produce these and not recycle them. So I kind of thought about this idea that someone would throw one of these out their window. They would land on the side of the road and then drift slowly into the embankment. In 20 or 30 years, it might discolor and slightly fill up with some debris. And then in maybe 100 years, it would completely fill up with sand or mud or rock and kind of sink below the level of the earth. And maybe 500 years, it would start to decay. Maybe even 1,000 years, you eventually get a positive of that bottle. And that's wishful thinking, probably. That plastic might be around a little longer than that. So each one of these, I made about, 400 or 500 of these things. And it was one of my favorite pieces because it really was a memory of each one of those corporations and their logos. You can see some of them you probably recognize. Smart Water on this real simple, kind of longer cylinder kind. Gatorade and CocaCola, they're very signature. Here's a drawing that's in the show called Inspired by the Countless Trips from my house to my studio. My studio is about 50 feet from my kitchen, and a lot of the art that I make in my studio has to do with repetition. And I was looking at some of the shanty towns in Juarez and Soweto, and just how people in these impoverished areas create their dwellings. This is all graphite. I've done a lot of graphite drawings. This is called Vein. I think it's about 60 by 50. Here's another drawing from the same period. This is called Getting Off the Grid is Hard to Do. And then this is a project that I'm always slightly apologetic about. I was asked to do a series of pieces as a fundraiser for the Aspen Museum in Colorado. And the year that they asked me, they were honoring Fred Tomaselli. And so I started thinking about Fred's work and the relationship we have to mushrooms, both in a culinary sense and a psychotropic sense. Going, looking at Alice in Wonderland in the 60s, and the year that I started this, we had a tremendous amount of rain upstate, and the mushrooms were popping up everywhere. So I started doing these little drawings of mushrooms, kind of in a colorful sense. And I made a series of mushrooms for the museum. And the mushrooms were such a hit that people wanted more mushrooms, and even more mushrooms. And I kind of discovered that this motif is somewhat universal, but I've always been somewhat critical of it because I didn't take it seriously. It was kind of a thing that I had a lot of fun doing, almost like making a Christmas cookie. But in retrospect, I think it's one thing that artists kind of do in their careers. You find something that we were talking last night about William Wegman and those dogs, and just how the dogs have, some people look at Wegman as, oh, he's sold out, and the dogs are his meal ticket. But if you really look at Wegman's practice, the dogs have been a symbolic part of his work since the beginning of his career. And he loves those dogs, and he has a relationship with those dogs. But as an artist, sometimes it's really it's easy to like point the finger and say, oh, those dogs are so cheesy and iconic, and blah, blah, blah. And so I think as I get older, I might apologize less for the work that I really enjoy making. Is that a question? Right, I see someone waving their hand. Excuse me?
Just waving.
Oh, okay, good. I was worried because it was like distress. like I was offending your relationship with mushrooms. Sorry. And I've also found that people hate mushrooms or they love them. There's really no in between. It's kind of like, yeah, I'll take mushrooms on my salad, but just a few. And I really love mushrooms. So anyway, I'm going on about something that I feel kind of sensitive about. But it is a body of work that I feel I don't do as much as I did, but I really did have a mushroom factory going on in the studio for a while. And they're kind of like guilty pleasures. They're fiberglass, sometimes they're tile, sometimes they're auto paint. The process is kind of a toxic process. I'm going to show you how they kind of come about a little later. But it also gave me a chance to collaborate once again with a glass blower in Chicago. I did the piece for Chicago, and the MCA came to me and said, well, let's do an edition. And I said, well, I've always wanted to make mushroom lamps, and I know they'll sell because people love mushrooms. And so we found this wonderful glass blower in Chicago, and she just went crazy. She loved it. And it was great for me because I'm not a glass blower, and she normally made platters and real kind of utilitarian objects. And so the more that she experimented, the more we kind of pushed it, she made some amazing mushrooms. And they ended up kind of looking almost marine-like in the end, almost like, coral, like they would live on coral. Here they are. Here they had a simple little base and a little light, and we ended up making about 30 of them, and the MCA sold them. They were a big hit. This is a public project. This is the proposal for a piece called Brooklyn Seeds, and it is on the, I always get this wrong, it's on the U line, it's the R train on the U line. It might be the U train on the R line, but I think it's the R train. And it's almost to Coney Island. And it's an above ground subway stop. Those of you who've taken the subway in New York have probably seen the variety of public art in the subway stations, and it's the largest, I think it's the largest public art institution in North America. And so it's 700 miles of railroad through all 5 boroughs. And it really gives artists an opportunity to have something permanent in New York. And so this was the proposal. The idea was that these plants would be oversized, and as you got off the train, you would be confronted by these flowering plants, and as a result, their seed pods are floating away. And that was kind of the metaphor for the commuter, or the person going to work, coming home, going to a party, etc. So these are the plants as you come down off the platform. And we had a difficult decision to make because I did not want to cut these plants out and inlay them into the wall. And so the fabricator came up with this idea that we would break all the tile, and you can kind of see it on the left here. where you see the tile here is the kind of classic 3-inch ceramic subway tile. And then we broke everything to incorporate it, to kind of bleed it in. That way we could avoid cutting this halo out of each plant. Here they are. It gave me a chance to go to Italy, and the piece was actually fabricated in Italy. There's a wonderful school, a kind of artisan school in northern Italy, very close to Venice, where they actually teach students how to mosaic. And it was great to go there, and I got a tour of the university. It's like a mosaic university. And one of the assignments was a class had to make a Jackson Pollock. And it was pretty exciting to watch them deconstruct the Jackson Pollock and make it out of mosaic. I had an opportunity to use mosaic quite a bit in my work because it has given me a material that I can kind of paint with in terms of sculpture. And it's a permanent material, it's an old material. It really dates back hundreds of years. And the colors that you can get, and the textures, and the durability of the material is the perfect material for exterior use. So here's the subway stop. You go up the stairs, and then at the top of the stairs, you meet this train. So this was my last show in New York, December 11, I think. As Susan mentioned, I've been invested in these plane paintings since about 2007, 2008. I work with a mill in western Massachusetts that really specializes in indigenous hardwoods. And I've always felt kind of torn between sculpture and painting. And I didn't really know kind of where I started and where I stopped. And I started this series because the forms occupy two spaces. They occupy the wall and they occupy the floor. And I love this idea that they're committal but non-committal. And that they can straddle that line between being and having cubic volume and also being a painting. It's been really difficult for me to make a painting on a square or a rectangle. But when I have this form, it's almost like the tree did half of the work, or 90% of the work. And that all I'm doing is I'm complementing what the tree did and what the tree had already lived through its life. This plank here is interesting on the right because the backside of that plank became a piece that's in the show. Oftentimes I'm really just not happy with one side, and I live with it for a while. And it does give me a chance to paint on the back side of the painting, basically. This is also in the show. Here's the detail. I really love this shot because it illustrates what nature did and basically what I'm trying to do. Not so much obliterate, but try to complement the wood. I love the idea that the wood has grown all these years and the grain is basically compressed energy. So it doesn't make sense for me to paint over it. All I can do is delicately try to impose my will, but still respect the grain. And it's so easy to not do anything because the wood is so beautiful. And it's so easy to do too much. So oftentimes I really feel there's a high success and failure rate to these, which most artists would agree that their work is about that. You have to accept failure as an artist. It's almost essential. And when you're younger, it's easier to get excited about your work. When you get older, it's harder to get excited. You have to do more to it. You have to live with it a little bit longer. Here's another one. I can't remember all these titles. I'm always jealous of H.C. Westerman. He numbered all his pieces, and I wish I would have done that from the beginning. That would have simplified things incredibly. My father's a sculptor, and I love his work, but his titles are so cheesy sometimes. And we really argue about titles. Titles are very difficult. Some artists really are good titlers and others aren't. And it's just luck of the draw. And I really love sometimes black and white paint on maple plank. Like, done, settles it. Chrysler with 4 times. Like, good. But sometimes it's, you know, the frog I caught in the river and it broke my heart, you know. And so you come to a place with titles and with bodies of work, and you know, when you deal with museums and galleries and institutions, all that stuff is important, but it's also, it can be, you end up having this kind of love-hate relationship with it, at least I do. Here's another one. This was inspired by a geode. There's a similar piece in this show. And this is, rarely do I use California redwood where I grew up, because I really do like to use wood that's indigenous to my backyard. And also I'm a little bit biased because I feel like there's going to be enough eastern conifers forever, but cutting down a redwood feels like killing a tiger. So I don't really like to support the redwood trade. Here's another one, maple. I believe this is on maple. This is walnut. This is a piece that I feel really proud about because this is the painting that I've always wanted to make, but I guess I had to be 46 or 45 to make it. And it's the painting that isn't a painting. The ICA owns this piece, and I'm really happy that other painters can see this, because it seems like an obvious idea to make a painting that doesn't exist, or the edges of a painting. This was one of those things that I came up with in my studio that I was really excited about for a long time. To suggest that there's a painting there, kind of a la Frank Stella. And the black paintings were something I was thinking about a lot. This is how they are made. I just wanted to show you a process. The entire surface is covered with tape, and then I do a drawing. Sometimes I do multiple drawings, and then they're cut out, and the result is this one. This is called the Gilded Age. This is a shorter piece that hangs on the wall. And then here's a couple of pieces that are in a traveling show right now. This was in the Calder show, and so is this, I believe. And then this just gives you an idea of sometimes how I sketch them out. That there is a kind of master plan to these things. That they start out, and oftentimes I change my mind, and there is a structure that occurs. This leads us to the MASS MoCA piece downstairs, Falling Water. Initially, when Susan and I started talking, I said I've always wanted to make a mobile that was a waterfall. And to MASS MoCA's credit, Susan was very excited. It's rare that you find a museum that lets you cut a hole in the floor and then dump water into it. And so I think this place is very special because of that. And Richard and the team here, they really supported me and really wanted this to happen the way I wanted it to happen. And I can't thank them enough, because all artists want to do is make their work and hear the word yes. And MASS MoCA never said no on any level. And so this was the first idea, which I was kind of struggling with because it had a real kind of trompe l'oeil feeling to it. That these basins of water would be like these pools that you find kind of in a creek or in nature. But I would definitely want to recycle parts of it from Chicago, from the Mobile in Chicago. And so one day I was here with Richard and kind of the crew looking around, and I discovered these large chunks of styrofoam. And I said, Richard, where did those come from? And you know, he said they were a previous project and they were left by an artist. And God, I said, God, they're great. They kind of look like Falling Water, like Frank Lloyd Wright. Like, you know, they have this real concrete architectural feeling. And I said, can I use them? And he said, well, we've only had them for 15 years. I don't see why not. And so we discovered enough of them that we were able to kind of design this thing with these chunks in mind. And there was a little confusion about the history of them. And Joe Thompson actually clarified exactly their source. And what they were, as an artist, I believe, showed at another institution, I think it was the ICA or somewhere in Boston, but he had made the Boston Harbor carved out on the bottom of the styrofoam. So it really made sense. Oh, and then what happened was he called Joe Thompson. He said, "Hey, I've got all this styrofoam, and I don't want to give it away. I don't want to throw it in the landfill. You guys want it?" And Joe said, "Yeah, I got the space. I'll take it." And so it stayed in this kind of derelict building for years until we discovered it. So here we are, kind of planning out how this is going to work. We worked with this really cool aquatics guy in Western Mass. We got these pools. And there's Mason and Derek kind of helping put this thing together. There it is in kind of all its glory. And it was a real challenge because we had to find a pump strong enough that we could pump the water all the way up, but not so powerful that it would flood the museum. And we had to find a spot to put it in because there's so much superstructure under that floor. And I was really happy with the way it turned out because it's the first time that I've been able to activate a sculpture. Water is such a wonderful tool, but it really is difficult to work with. As a homeowner, and anyone would know this that lives in a dwelling, water can be your best friend and your worst enemy. And so to make a sculpture that water runs through was a really fun experience, but a challenging one. So here it is, kind of cascading off. One of the success stories behind this sculpture was a material that we found through the fountain guide that actually absorbs the splash. So when the water hits these kind of collected basins, it is absorbed, so we don't ruin the floor. And then there it is, kind of exiting the sculpture. So here's jumping into more mosaics. I'm going to lead you up to like the last two big pieces that I've made this summer after MASS MoCA opened or completed. I've been working on these two pieces for a few years. This was another project, going to my local dump, fiberglassing these tires and then mosaicing them. And this was a really fun project because both of my grandfathers worked for Goodyear, and I was actually born in Jackson, Michigan, and so I've had this real kind of tire thing in my background for a long time. Being a Michigan native, but growing up in California, Michigan was always this kind of somewhat exotic but slightly depressed car industry state. And I grew up hearing these incredible stories about the Goodyear tire plant. And so this was kind of like a little homage to my background. Here's the process I was telling you about that doesn't always make me somebody that's popular inside the house after I'm done. And that is this lamination process and carving this styrofoam. And I'm doing less and less of this because it is so incredibly toxic. But the result are these kind of mosaic stumps. Here's a Mosaic Law Bench. And so then that leads up to this piece called Underlife. And the Albright Knox in Buffalo has got this wonderful collection. If you haven't seen it, you really need to see it. It's a world-famous museum. And during Louis Groucho's tenure as the director, one of his focuses was the campus of the Albright Knox. And over the course of 10 years, he bought, the museum acquired quite a few pieces for the exterior. And mine was basically the last piece before he left. And the idea was, I started researching Buffalo, and Buffalo has this amazing park system that was designed by Frederick Olmsted. And he planted over 20,000 trees in Buffalo. And so Buffalo always has this, the stereotype that it's snow and it's horrible weather coming off Lake Erie and it's a depressed city. But Buffalo is actually a really beautiful city and a grand city. And this park system is spectacular, the way it interlocks the entire city. You can walk the entire city through this park system. And so the more I went to Buffalo, I realized how essential trees are for Buffalo. And so I wanted to do something that dealt with the life of the tree, the root system of the tree. And I wanted to kind of, exaggerate the importance of the root system of the tree. So this was the initial drawing. And these are some trees that had fallen down in the creek where I live. This is a big sycamore. So I found a tree that fell, brought it into my studio, and I kind of extended its roots, almost like a spider, that it could be walking in a way. And from there, I went and I worked with these guys in Long Island, and I started bending the roots, literally like bending pasta in a really cool machine. You feed the steel through, and you bend it, and you crink it, and then we weld it in place, and then sleeve in another root, and so on and so forth. So it was a real process because I did have to deal with the snow, I had to deal with the exterior, the conditions of Buffalo, the weight of the snow, the wind coming off Lake Erie. The engineer made me change some roots. You'll see here, I'll take you back real quick. My design was to have no roots in the middle. The idea was that people could interact with this sculpture, they could walk around. So the initial drawing really does have kind of some negative space in it that you can go in there and interact. Well, I fought with the engineer, but they made me put two roots kind of holding the mass of the load. So the challenge was to disguise those roots within the structure so that they look natural. You can kind of see them here. These two guys supported basically the load of the lake being here. So I had to bend those, and I had to make it real complex up in here, just like a tree would grow, and kind of push these out, but they had to remain a certain distance. And so there we are. After the steel came this styrofoam, this kind of spray foam. You know, the expandable foam you find in a hardware store. These were the little kits. And so this was actually kind of fun, but equally as toxic as some of the other things. And we just sprayed it all the way around and built this up. This was a solid block of styrofoam. And just kept going. These little break points here were for the fabricator because they had to be fiberglass, and those pieces had to be put back together once we got to Buffalo. So then here is the parts. It was made up of, initially it was made up of 50 parts. And when I got to Buffalo, we had narrowed it down to 26 parts. And then I had this brilliant idea. Actually, it wasn't my idea, it was Buffalo's idea. I was complaining about how long this was taking, and the curator said, "Have you ever thought about interns?" And so sure enough, I got a hold of Bennington, and I got these three fabulous interns, and they love this project. I put them in a separate house with a lot of tile, a lot of pizza, a lot of beer, and they went for it, and they tiled and tiled and tiled and tiled. And here they are, and we did them in colors. So there's 6 colors on the sculpture. The idea is the sculpture is all mirrored to reflect the environment around it. So there was smoke, gray, copper, peach, emerald green, black, and mirror, like a classic mirror. And I kind of did it like I would, like the drawing. I wanted it to be somewhat pictorial, somewhat like a painting. And then here it is, kind of getting installed. I left the trunk for the last part, thinking, oh, that was no big deal. We did all this. The interns did all that. I can do that really quick. Well, I spent 6 weeks in Buffalo. I know Buffalo pretty well, and it never ended. It was so much work. And they put up this fence, and so we were like these kind of corralled, caged wild tilers. And the comments and the people, the interaction with the public is the best part of public art. I mean, you can have a million shows and a million great museums, but there is nothing like the public. When you make public art, it's an entirely different experience. And you reach ages from 1 to 100, and the questions and the responses are always so incredibly honest. Susan's probably not going to like this, but once you enter a museum, your entire relationship to art changes. And some people, for example, don't know that galleries are even free. They don't even go into galleries. But when you make something in the public, your relationship that you have, that your work has, is completely different from the institutional setting. And I tend to like both of those experiences. It's selfish of me because I want it all, but the public experience is so different from the museum experience. And the comments, I wanted to keep a blog. One guy said one day, it looks like Bob Marley's hair upside down. one guy said, "Did you put those on individually?" That was the best. Yeah, we did. We actually put them on individually. He walked away shaking his head. But I got this wide range of experiences every day, and the interns from Bennington were just they were having the greatest experience, just witnessing this. Anyway, there's a little makeshift scaffold we built, and there it is, finally taking away the scaffold, and the chain link fence is now down, I believe. But it really does shimmer in the light, and it does activate the space. So much of the Allwright's collection is from the 60s and 70s, and the work is very stagnant. It's steel often, it's blocky. It was made to withstand the elements of Buffalo. And I really wanted something that would kind of activate the relationship that the roots have to the underground, or that would mimic that relationship. Here's some more details. Whoops. And then this next project, I'm not an architect, but if I was, I wish I designed this house. Anyway, a client contacted me, and they own 60 acres in Santa Fe, and they said, "We want you to do something on our property." And they said, "We want you to spend a year thinking about it." And it's kind of a dream client. So I went out to Santa Fe, and I hiked with them, and I spent time on their land. And we, up and down, trees, rocks. And I really fell in love with the New Mexico state tree is a Pinion Pine. And because they're at 7,700 feet, the Pinion Pine is kind of a dwarf pine in this case. They can get much bigger, but New Mexico only gets about 15 inches of rain a year in this altitude. So these trees are kind of dwarfed. And the clients have a very special relationship with these trees. And so I started walking around, and I discovered the pine cones are much different than like a ponderosa pine. The pine cone on a Pinion Pine is a much more condensed pine cone that has this beautiful kind of woven back to it. And the more we would hike, I would discover these pine cones and kind of collect them. And I finally just came up with this idea. I said, I want to make an enormous pine cone. I want to make a pine cone so big that it really reminds us of how important those trees are. That it reminds us of our position on your property. And I want to place it somewhere that you would discover along your hikes. And they were really into it. So here's a drawing of how this pine cone might exist in nature. Very natural, as if it had fallen off a tree. And there it is. I had the chance to go to Bangkok and work at a foundry in Thailand, because I wanted to work with a foundry that would stress detail and craftsmanship. And a friend of mine had been working there for 10 years, and he said, "You got to come over here because they'll do a great job. They will take so much pride." And it was a complex fabrication because it was made up of 56 petals. And here it is in wax. That's the wax version. In order to achieve the realism of the kind of butt of the pine cone, we had to make the bottom piece one leaf, basically. And then the individual leaves are here, and they are all welded into a central core. This piece here is actually made up of one piece. Here we are kind of testing the patina colors of how it might look, and there it is getting installed. We weighed 5,000 pounds, and the kind of site is just off the back end of the house. The house is back over here. It's deceptive because it's such a steep incline. So you're walking up, you discover it, and then you walk up and you see the house. But when you come to the house, you can see it after we park. And this was kind of exciting because we had to put it in with a crane. And then I said to the crane operator, "Can I go up and take some pictures from the air?" And the higher I got, it really looked like a real pine cone. And they kind of had some fun with me because after I'd been ordering them around for 3 days, they kind of got even. So to go 100 feet above your sculpture is a little bit frightening. And here it is, and there's the back that I was describing to you, and that's the part I'm the most proud of. Because when I went to Thailand, I made this out of wax, the kind of stem, and then we really worked hard to make it feel like these grew individually out of that pinecone. When really this whole thing is one like pancake piece that's all welded together. Yes, I believe that's it. Thank you.